Okay, so in this video we're going to go through modeling a cartoon character. I'm going to start by opening up the material editor and bringing in the concept drawings of the character. So I've already got it in here. It's just loaded in as a bitmap. And I'm going to put this on a plane. So I'm going to draw a plane in the view. So I'm measuring in feet and inches. And I'm going to expand my view. So this plane doesn't need to be divided with segments right now, and I'm going to put my image on the plane. So if I turn on snaps, I can right click on snaps, and I'm just going to snap to 45 degrees, and I'll rotate this so it's standing up straight. And I just want to check that the plane is the same aspect ratio as the drawing. So if you go into your map and you view the bitmap, just open up the location. You can right click and go to properties, and under details I'm just going to have a quick look at the dimensions. So this was done at 1183 by 1810. I'm going to round up and say 12 by 18. And I'll remember those numbers and punch them into the length and width. So 12 and 18, and you can see I've done that backwards. It's got to be the other way around, so 18 and 12. Okay. So from here I know the aspect is going to be pretty much perfect, pretty close. So I can start modeling the character based on my image, knowing that my image is scaled properly. So I still need to scale the image down, but I'm going to draw or create a box as a reference point. So this box I'm going to make 5 foot or 5'9". So whatever the height of your character is going to be, you can create a reference block. So I'm going to center this. And in the front view, I know this block is now 5'9", so I'm going to scale the drawing down to the block size. So then I'll know my drawing, the character in the drawing is going to be 5'9". So when I start modeling based on the drawing, it's going to be 5'9". So the first thing I'll do is line up the image so that the feet line up with the bottom of the block. And then I'm going to go up to Hierarchy, Effect Pivot Only, and just move the pivot down to the bottom here. So I'm moving the pivot down so that when I scale the image, it's going to scale based on the pivot. So the feet will stay in the same spot. I'm just scaling so that the feet line up at the bottom and the head at the top of this block. And now I know I'm set up to create a character that's going to be 5'9". Okay, so the next thing I'll do is divide my image, because I have the front and side view on one image. If you had multiple images, you could bring them in and set up separate planes, but in this case I'm just going to divide this. So I'll just convert this to editable poly, and I'll connect an edge through the middle. I'm going to hit G to turn the grid off. So I'm going to connect a new edge through the center. I have edged faces on so I can see the edges, and I could just slide this back and forth, but I'm going to show you something. I'm going to click OK. So when I click OK, the edge is still selected, and if I move it back and forth, it's going to stretch the image. So I have to go in under Edit Geometry and check Preserve UVs. When I turn this on, it'll preserve the UVs and the image won't skew or stretch when I move this back and forth. So just make sure this edge is right through the center between the front and side view, and then I'm going to grab the side view as a polygon and detach it. So I'm going to find Detach under Edit Geometry. Might as well name it now, so I'll name it Side View. Click OK. And now that the original is still selected, I'll call it front view. So from here, I'm going to move the side view over for now, and I'm going to line up the front view. I'll turn the grid back on to help me line this up. And if I select that reference block, I can actually delete this now. And I'm just going to line up this front view so that it's lined up in the center of the grid. So the center of the grid is just going to run through the center of the character. And I'm going to start with the head, so I'm just going to line up the head. So this center line is going to run through the bridge of his nose. And the drawing's not perfect, so obviously it's going to be a little bit off, which is fine. So I'll grab the side view. Snaps are still on for rotation. I'm just going to snap this. And in the left view, I can grab that and shift it over towards the center. So again, the head, I'll just make sure that the center of the grid is running through the center of the head to help me line everything up and start modeling everything straight. So this character is going to be funny because he's not standing straight. He has an arc on the back, and in the front view you can see he's not standing in the T-pose. So those are just a couple issues I'll have to deal with as I'm modeling this character. So if I go back to perspective view, I'm just going to slide my front view a little bit forward, and I'll probably take the side view and push it out of the way. So it's still centered in the side and the front view. I've just pushed them back to give me space to model. Okay, so I'm going to turn off angle snaps. And to start modeling, I'm going to start with a box. I'm going to close the material editor at this point. I'm going to draw a box, and I'll keep this box square, so length, width, and height are going to be 1. And I'm going to divide this into 4 segments, and I'll explain what I'm doing as I'm doing this. So I've divided this into 4 segments. So you can see it gives me 4 rows of polygons in each direction, and I have a center seam. So what I'll do from here is add, under modifiers, I'm adding the Spherify modifier, and it's going to take that box with that edge flow and turn it into a sphere. So the reason I'm doing this opposed to modeling from a sphere is if I create a sphere, you can see all the edges come to a point at the top and bottom, and as we subdivide, all these polygons are going to subdivide and get denser and denser, and just the way this geometry flows around the sphere is going to be pretty much useless for the way we want to model this character. So I'm going to get rid of that sphere, and we're going to use the spherified box. You can see all the edges and all the polygons wrap around the sphere shape, and they're fairly spaced out. So from here, I'll convert this to editable poly. I can name it. This character's name is Bob, so I'll say this is Bob's head. And in the front view, I'll move this up towards the top of the drawing. So this character is symmetrical, so I want to make sure I center everything as I'm modeling. So I'm not worried about the z-axis. I've moved this up, so it's the x and y. I want to make sure x, especially in the front view, I'm looking at x, and I can center y, but when I hit L and go to the left view, I just want to make sure everything is centered through here. So if I want to put this in see-through mode to see through to my drawing, I'm going to hit Alt-X, and now I can see through. So that's a quick basic setup to start modeling the head. So even from here you can see if I need to shift my drawing, this is a chance to shift things around. And because this is a symmetrical character, I'm going to select my base mesh now, hit Alt X to put it back out of see-through mode, and if I go to the front view, I can take half of this sphere, so I'm selecting half the polygons, and delete them. And I'm going to mirror this as an instance now. So I'm going to go up to Mirror. I'm going to choose Instance. I'm mirroring in the X-axis. I'm going to click OK. So now this is an instance. So if I go back to the other side and start pulling out vertices, everything I do to this side is going to update. So to start out, I only have to model on half, and it's going to update on the other side. There's also the symmetry tool, or symmetry modifier, which we'll get into later. For now, this way, if I want to, as I'm modeling, I can hide half of it and then just unhide it. So to start keeping things organized, before I get into this any further, I'm going to start putting things into layers. So I'm going to grab, holding Control and selecting both reference images, and I'm going to open up the layer manager, and I'm going to create a new layer, which is going to drop these into the new layer, and I'm going to name these concept drawings. So what you should have is the new layer that you created, which is concept drawings with the side and front view, and everything else should be in the default layer. So if I grab the mesh, I'm going to grab both halves and create another layer. It creates a new layer with both pieces in it, and I'm going to call this Bob Mesh. So now if I need to, I can hide these layers and hide everything in the layer. Okay, so I'm set up already to start modeling. I'm going to save the file. I'm constantly going to be saving the file in case something happens and I need to go back to an older version. So I'd already set this up and saved it out as Bob Model 1 with nothing in it. So this is going to be actually my second save. So I'm going to hit the plus sign from now on, and it's going to save it incrementally. So each time I hit the plus sign, it's going to change it to the next number. So this is Bob Model 1. If I hit plus, it saves it as Bob Model 2. So at this point, we're going to start blocking in the shape of his head. So I'm going to hit L to go to the left view, and I'm going to use the left view to start blocking this in. So I'm going to select, actually I'm going to jump back out to perspective for a minute. Before I start doing this, I'm going to grab the instance half and hit Alt X to put it in see-through mode and then freeze it. This way I'm not accidentally moving it around. So I'm going to go back to the side I'm modeling on. I'll also put that in see-through mode, and I'll jump back to the left view. So from here, I'm trying to keep the geometry extremely simple so as to not get confused with where my edge loops are getting placed in. For this guy, I'm not taking him into Mudbox or ZBrush. I'm modeling the whole thing in 3ds Max. So what I'm going to do is have a look at where I need to put in edge loops, and I'm going to extrude eye sockets. I'm going to extrude the ears out, the mouth, the nose. So I'm going to have to start dividing this mesh up into edge loops and cross sections where I can start extruding and blocking out the features of his face. So the first thing I'll do is to make this even easier to look at. The way we have our edges here with the way we've divided up the box and then spherified it, I'm going to take all the vertices on the top and I'm going to move them up towards the top of his head. And I'm going to take all the vertices on the bottom and move them down towards the bottom of his neck. So ultimately this is going to be the top of his head, and I've already got the round dome shape there, and this is going to be the bottom of his neck. And because the way this character he's wearing a collared shirt, and I don't plan on having him take the shirt off or anything like that, I'm going to model this character with his head separate, and then I'll do the body as another separate object, and then I'll just skin the head and the body both to the same rig. So if my character wasn't wearing this colored shirt, or if for some reason he had to change clothing, I would model the whole thing as one object, and then I would just model clothing separately and either skin wrap it or skin it to the character somehow. So I'm going to take the vertices on the bottom and flatten them out. I'm just scaling them so that they're flat, and I'm just going to leave them sitting down here for now. Before I start moving or reshaping anything, I'm just going to start blocking in edge loops where I think I'm going to be extruding features from. So I'm going to hit G to turn off the grid. So right now I've got this center line, which is lined up in the left view. It's lined up right underneath the bottom of his eye. So I'm going to use this, but before I do, I just want to jump back to my front view and check that it's lined up the same. So you can see in the front view, you can see here this side of his face is lower than the other side, and it's not quite lining up. And I know that this drawing is probably not lined up with the left view. So what I'm going to do is take this drawing. So I've selected the image in the background, and I'm just going to nudge it up a bit. Oops, sorry, Z-axis. So I'm just going to push this up and make sure that these are lined up the same. So now when I'm modeling in my front and left view, I'm going to make sure when I'm cutting in edges they're running across the same features on the face. So I'm going to jump back to my left view, and I'm going to select the model again, and I'm just going to grab that center line as vertices and scale it together in the X-axis. You can see I'm just pushing this in. So at this point I'm looking at the silhouette of my character's head, and I'm just trying to match the outside of the mesh so it's going to flow through here. So I'm just going to start blocking all of this in. So I can grab the neck and scale it in. I'm not going to rotate anything yet, but I can scale this down roughly to the size of his neck. Ultimately I'm going to take this, I'm going to rotate it and shift it over to where his neck is. And I'm going to have this whole thing follow the curve of his head. But for now, I'm just trying to keep the geometry extremely simple and block in the features. So up top, I can grab all these vertices again and kind of scale them a little bit flatter and scale them in closer to the size and shape of the top of his head. For the hair, I'm going to do the hair separate. It's going to be a separate object that I'll attach later. Same thing with the eyebrows. I could model them into the mesh, but for this guy I'm just going to model separate eyebrows and attach them to the mesh. So I'm modeling this as if there's no hair there. I'm modeling through the hair, just modeling the top of his head bald. So it's a little bit too high, so I'm going to pull this down a bit. And from this point, before I start rotating and shifting things again, I'm going to start blocking in, I'm going to start cutting in new edge loops and blocking in features where I can start extruding things. So I'll start from the top and work my way down towards the mouth. So first thing I'm going to look at is the eyes. So I've already got this edge loop running through the center, and it goes across the bottom of the eye and runs towards the bridge of the nose. So I'm going to grab these edges through here. You could also hold shift and select. You could select one, hold shift, select one beside it, and that's a shortcut for ring. I'm just going to drag across like this to select them. So I'm going to hit connect and connect one loop straight through here. I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to use the scale tool to scale this in the Y axis just to flatten it out. So at this point I'm going to drag this down and line this up towards the top of the eye. So something like this, and now I know I have these edges running through the top and the bottom of the eye. And when I look at this in the front view, if I hit Alt X here, there's a section in the front now where I'm going to be able to start thinking about extruding eye sockets from. So I'll come back to this. I'm going to go back to the left view and just keep working my way down. So I'm going to connect another edge loop through here. So I'm selecting all these edges through here. I'm going to hit connect, and I'm going to slide this one up towards the bottom of the nose. So right now this runs through the bottom of the nose and kind of over towards the top of the ear. So I'm going to click OK. So this is going to give me a section on the front where I can extrude the nose from. So I'm going to come back to this again later. So I'll go ahead and connect another edge loop through here. And I'll slide this one as well. So this one is now running through the bottom of his ear and over through the center of his mouth, but I'm going to change this afterwards. So I've blocked in sections for the eye, the nose, the ear, and I'm going to deal with the mouth separately as well. Okay, so I'm going to hit P for perspective and rotate around the front. If I hit Alt X, I'm just looking at how all these edges are flowing around the front here. So I still need to cut some edges into the front. So I'm going to hit F for front view. If I hit Alt X for see through, I'm going to run another edge right through the center here. So I'm going to hit ring and connect, and I'm going to use this to divide up a section for the bridge of the nose, and now it's also dividing this section here into two polygons, which I'm going to use to help me create the eye socket. So I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to come back to cutting in more edge loops a little bit later. So in the left view, if I look again, I've roughly blocked in the shape of the head, so I could scale some of this out still. And eventually I'm going to start shifting and rotating this around to follow the shape of his head. So in the left view we're pretty close. I'm going to go to the front view, and I'm going to start doing the same thing in the front view. So while everything's straight, before I start rotating things, in the front view I'm going to go through and scale these vertices together and shift them over. Because of the way I have this set as two separate halves, when I scale this, it's going to come separate from the center, so I'm just going to shift everything back over. So I'm just going to quickly scale and shift these vertices over, and I'm just going to start having the outside of his head follow the shape of the drawing. Eventually I'm going to attach these two halves together and weld the vertices through the center seam. So I'm just quickly lining this up, just scaling and shifting. So you can see we've quickly blocked in the shape of his head just by scaling and shifting the vertices across. So I can go through and make sure that this is all straight, and I'm looking at how the edges are flowing and curving around the side of his head. So I want these edges to flow nicely and curve down the side of his head. I don't want them to be all jagged. I'm trying to keep everything straight. Okay, so if I jump back to the left view, at this point I know the shape of the head is right. It's correct in the front view. So in the left view, now I'm going to start shifting the vertices back and forth and rotating to compensate for the curve of this neck here. So down here, I'm going to grab these vertices and just shift them over. And I'm going to connect another one through the center here. But even before I do that, I'm going to grab the bottom of his neck and just move it right over. So I'm going to move this over and I'm going to rotate it so that this is all flowing towards the base of his neck. So I can make sure and scale this a little bit more. If I go back, I'm just going to scale it directly across the x-axis and rotate it. So I'm going to stick this a little bit through his shirt, and then I'm going to grab these edges and connect another edge loop in the center. So I'm going to make sure this one's centered. So now you can see it takes on the angle between this edge and this edge, and I can shift this over and scale it out. So at this point we've got the shape blocked in. I'm going to need to add more edge loops through here, especially in the neck area, to keep this a little bit smoother. So I've connected that edge down the center, which gives me an area for the bridge of the nose. And I'm going to be looking at extruding eye sockets from these two polygons on the front. So before I extrude these back, I want to divide these into 4 equal parts because I'm going to try and make this round as I extrude it back. So I'm going to grab an edge and hit ring and connect and click OK. So this is going straight through the center here. And to block in the shape of the eye, I'm going to grab those 4 polygons and use inset. And I'm just going to inset about a 1/4 inch and click OK. So if I go to the front view and I hit Alt X, you can see this is lined up close to the eye. I could shift this around, but right now I'm just going to keep everything straight. And if I grab these 4 corners, so I'm grabbing the 4 vertices at the corners here, I can scale these towards each other, and it's going to start to round out the shape of the eye here. So I can also keep things straight by selecting the vertices down the center, just scale them towards each other. And ultimately I'm going to use Turbo Smooth to subdivide this mesh. So I can add Turbo Smooth at this point. And you can see the result here from scaling the corners together. It rounds out this section here. So if I go back to Editable Poly, I'm going to select those 4 faces again, and I can go to Perspective View. I'm going to extrude these back to open up a section for the eye socket. So I'm going to use Extrude. I'm going to extrude in the negative, so I'm going back into the mesh. So I'm just going to push this back and click OK. So if I go back to the front view, you can see as it extrudes, it's shifting it off to the side. So I'm going to move this over and keep it lined up with the opening of the eye. And then in the left view, I'm just going to snap. If I hit Alt X, I'm going to scale this flat. So I'm back in perspective. I'm out of see-through mode. So I've blocked in the eye socket, and I'm going to use morph targets later to have this character blink and close his eyes. So the eyeballs will probably be spheres that I stick in here. And when I'm using the morph targets, I'm going to grab the edges or vertices up here and I'm going to bring them together to close the eyelids. So I'm going to need edge loops through here to maintain the shape of the eyelids, and to avoid having this collapse in the eye socket, I'm going to throw another edge loop through the center. So if I hit ring and connect, I'm going to throw an edge loop through the center here, and this edge loop is going to help to keep the eye socket open in the middle. And I'm going to throw another edge loop closer to the outside of the eye socket, and I'll be able to use this to keep the shape of his eyelid. So he's really cartoony, really simple. I'm not putting any detail into the eyelid. If you had a character with more detailed eyelids, you might want to put more edge loops in through here to help you control the shape of the eyelids. So I'm going to have one close on the inside of the eye socket and one close on the outside as well. So I'm going to connect another edge loop from the outside, and I'll just push it close to the edge, and if I go back to the front view, I can straighten that out. So I'm just going to grab these vertices and push them away from each other using scale. So I'm just trying to keep this equally spaced around the eye socket. So I can round out the outside of it as well just by grabbing these four corners again and kind of scaling them in a bit. And I can push the tops and sides out. So if I want to keep all this straight or shift things around, I can just drag and grab groups of vertices and shift things over. So I want to make sure these corners line up close on the top and the bottom and the side and the front. So where this is kind of angled, I can rotate these, just straighten this out. Okay, so I've got eye sockets blocked in. I'll come back to them later. The next thing I'm going to have a look at is extruding the nose. So in the drawing, the bridge of his nose, it kind of comes up through the center of his eye here, and I've blocked in geometry that I can use to extrude that. So I'm going to grab in the front view, or in perspective, I'm going to grab these two polygons on the front and just extrude them straight out. So because I'm extruding this on a half with the instance, you can see when I bring it out like this, it's creating geometry on this side. And like I said, later I'm going to weld these together. So I'm going to grab these polygons on the inside and delete them. because I want this section to be open, and I'm going to slide these polygons back towards the front like this, so that the half I'm working on still lines up with the instanced half in the center. So if I jump to the left view and hit Alt X, I'm just going to grab the vertices and line this all up with the drawing. So that's the nose quickly blocked in. I'm going to add more edge loops later and fix the shape of the nose. If I look at this in the front, you can see I could grab this corner at the base of the nose and shift it over. So I'm just sliding vertices around and trying to block in the shapes without adding too much geometry in the beginning. So if I want to see Turbo Smooth on this, I can turn on toggle end result. So show end result on off toggle, this switch here. If I turn that on, I can see the Turbo Smooth mesh, the subdivided mesh. So if I go up to Turbo Smooth, ultimately I'm going to probably add 2 iterations of Turbo Smooth. So that's subdividing the polygons twice. And as I'm working in editable poly, I can keep editing the base mesh. So you can see this orange cage around the subdivided model. That's the base mesh that I can still grab selections and edit. So you can see, if I look at this, the base of the nose needs to keep a harder edge in here. So to do that, I'm going to grab an edge here and hit ring. You can see it's going to ring around through the bridge of the nose, and I'll just connect another edge loop through here, which I'll keep towards the base of the nose to keep a sharper edge along the shape of his nose. So I've connected this, and connect edge settings is open. If I toggle Turbo Smooth and start to slide this back towards his face, you can see how sharp it's going to keep that edge. So I can decide here how far I want to slide this towards his face. So something like this, 90 is good. I'm going to click OK. And that's his nose blocked in. So I'll come back and finish detailing his nose later. I'm going to continue by extruding the ears, and then I'll attach them and deal with the mouth. So to block the ears in, I'm going to have a look at the side view again. So I'm probably looking at extruding ears from this section here. So I'm going to hit L to look in the side view. In the side view, actually it looks like his ears are a little bit further back, so I'm going to select these edges here, and I could extrude these right from here, or you could do an inset and then extrude. So I'm going to inset these ears and extrude them straight out. So as I extrude this out, I could scale the polygons in the local axis at the end here just to flatten them out. And if I look in the front view, I'm just going to move this out to where the edge of his ear should be. And I think for now I'm going to rotate and try to keep this straight. So I'll just cut this ear in straight, and then I'll rotate it back. So if I go to the left view, do the same thing, just make sure it all lines up. So I'm going to move this edge in the center here, and I'm just going to shift it over. Try to keep that line centered through the ear. I like to try and keep everything nice and even, so as I'm cutting in new edge loops, if I have to cut them in, I can cut them in as straight as possible. So alright, that's good for now. I'm going to look at this again in the front view. So the shape of his ear comes out in this oval or clam like shape. I'm going to grab these edges through here and connect another edge loop in the center. So I'll put it in the center and I'll scale it flat. Oops. And if I scale this out as well, I'm going to start to get the shape of his ear. But if you look at the drawing, where his ear peaks is towards the end here. It's not quite in the center. So I'm going to shift this over. And if I look at it with Turbo Smooth on, you can see how this is starting to look. So I can also grab these vertices and just kind of pull this down. So you can see, like I said before, the drawing isn't lining up on either side, so I'm just going to focus on one side for now, which is this side here. So if I want, I can throw another edge loop in here and slide it closer to the base again. So first I'll do this and scale it, keeping everything nice and straight. And I can slide it back towards the base of his ear to help me keep the shape. So at this point, as I'm trying to curve out the ear, I can add in as many edge loops or whatever that I would need to keep the shape of his ear. And I can just shift these things around. So if I want to keep this curve in the center, I can go ahead and grab these edges and add another loop through here. Just kind of scale it out. So as I look at this in perspective, I can see the ear is a little bit thick. So I'm going to turn off Turbo Smooth. If I just grab these end polygons, which were already selected, I can hit Grow to grow the selection out towards the base of the ear. So Shrink and Grow will grow or shrink my selection. And I can scale these in to kind of flatten the ear out. So to get this little divot in here in the ear, so for the ear canal, I can grab polygons on the front and I can just do an inset like this. And you can see as I inset this, it's pulling this edge across the edge on top of it. So I'm just going to straighten this out. And I'll grab that inset area and extrude it back a little bit. Something like this. So if I hit Turbo Smooth, you'll see this gives me this big divot area in the ear. So in the drawing, I kind of just want the lip to be at the top and then kind of gradually smooth out back into the bottom of the ear. So I'm just going to grab vertices around the inside where I did the inset and start to fan them out. So I'm just moving these away from the edge. And as I come towards the bottom, I'll start pulling these back out. So if it helps, you can toggle Turbo Smooth to see how far out you'd want to push this out. And as I pull these out, you can see it keeps the lip at the top, and then it just kind of gradually smooths back into the bottom. So if you want the inside of your ear to be a little more concave, this is where I can grab an edge here and hit ring. And I'm going to connect another edge loop straight through the center of the ear. I've already got one going through the center in this direction, which I'm going to use in a minute. I'm going to throw another one through the center here, and this edge that I cut in here, I'm also going to use the edges at the front to chamfer open the mouth area. So I'm going to start shifting some of this around in a minute. But for now I'm just going to connect this through here, and I can straighten this out. I could have done this earlier too, but I'm just going to do it right now. And from here I can kind of pull these back, and it'll give the inside of the ear a bit more of a concave look to it. So as I'm doing this, I'm just looking at how, from an angle like this, I'm looking at how the line or the edge curves back into the ear and then out again. And at the very end here, I'm just going to pull these vertices back a bit, kind of round out the end of the ear too. So that's not too bad. You can see up here the lip. I'm going to pull this down because just to match it up with the drawing a little closer. So I could even just grab some of these polygons and pull them down a bit like this, and then adjust that edge in here. Alright, that's close enough for now. I can come back to this, so I don't want to be too finicky here. If on the outside of the ear, around the edge of the ear, you can see I've got that edge through the center. So right now the ear looks kind of square around the outside. If I grab these edges through the center here and just kind of push them out all the way around the ear, so I'm just going to go through here like this, kind of pull these out. If I toggle on Turbo Smooth, you'll see as I pull these out, it's going to round out the ear. So if I have these set in close, this section of the ear is going to be flat. If I pull them out, it's going to round out the edge of the ear. So I'm just going to slightly shift these out all the way around the edge. And again, the back of the ear, if you want the back of the ear to be curved out, I'm just going to grab the edges across the center here, and I can pull them out like this. And that's good for now. I can come back and fix this up later. At this point, all the symmetrical features have been blocked in. So I'll have a quick look in the left view. Turn off Turbo Smooth for a minute, hit Alt X. So in the left view here, I want to shift some of these edges a bit. So I'm just going to come through here and grab this edge that's going through the bottom of the ear. I'm going to loop this through, and I'm going to rotate this edge and shift it down a bit. And I'm going to have this edge cut through the bottom of the ear and down towards the bottom lip area, so through the bottom of the mouth. And I'm going to wind up reflowing some of this later anyways, so I'm just going to leave this like this. And then this edge here that was going through the center of the ear, I'll just grab this from the front like this and shift it down. And I can rotate it. So I'm going to chamfer my mouth open from this edge here. So ultimately I'm going to probably cut new edges in here and change all this anyways, but just going to line that up for now. Hit Alt X. So I can go through here and pull some of this out where it's kind of indented. Okay, so from here, I'm just going to space out these vertices across the front, and then I'm going to attach these two halves together. So once you're ready to attach the two halves together, you're going to unfreeze the instanced half. So select your original half, delete Turbo Smooth. For now I'm going to right click and delete that from the modifier. And I'm going to use, under Edit Geometry, I'm going to click Attach. And right now I can't attach the other half because it's still an instance. So I'm going to grab the instanced half, right click and convert to editable poly. So now it's a separate object. It's not an instance anymore. So if I was to start modeling on the other side, you can see there's no longer an instance. So from here I can attach the two halves together. I'll turn off attach, go to the front view, and I'm going to zoom in and carefully select all the vertices down the center seam. So I'm going to hold Control and just go through and select all the vertices just on the center edge. So if you want to hit Alt X to see through and make sure there's nothing funky going on with the back facing vertices. So with everything selected here, all the vertices down the center, I'm going to scale these together along the X-axis just to make sure all those vertices are overlapping and are nice and tight. And then I'm going to open up the Weld Settings tab, and I'm just going to nudge this up. So you can see right here where these two edges are really close. If I start to push the threshold up too far, it's going to reach out and grab those because they're so close together. So you can see I don't even have to go up to 1/4 inch in here. I can just tap the arrow key and you'll see the number here. So before there was 506 vertices, after there's 474. So I know all these overlapping vertices should have welded together. So I just nudged the weld threshold up 1, and I'm going to click OK. And to test this out, I could either grab half the polygons on one side of the face, and just to test it, if I pull these apart, everything should stay connected through the edges in the center. So you can see I've probably didn't quite grab everything down here. So if the weld didn't work, there'd be holes through here as I stretch this apart. So I'm just going to hit undo. The other thing is when you add Turbo Smooth, when it subdivides the mesh, if the vertices weren't welded through the center, you'd have holes and pinching going on. So looking at this with Turbo Smooth, you can see where, if I turn off Turbo Smooth, these edges along the center where I cut in a new edge loop for the bridge of the nose are really tight together. So when I turn on Turbo Smooth, it's creating a line through the center. So I'm going to want to go around and space these vertices out a little further apart. But I'll come back to that later. For now, I'm just going to chamfer open the mouth area. So I'm going to go down here and select these edges on the front. So if I go to the front view, so I'm going to choose 4 edges across the front, so 2 on either side. And I can go to perspective view, and I'm going to chamfer open the mouth area. So if I hit chamfer settings, I'm going to chamfer with open chamfer selected. So it's creating a hole. So I'm just pushing this out, something like this, just to give me an open area for the mouth to start with. So I'm going to click OK. And now I'm going to have a look at reflowing some of the edges around his mouth. So I want edge loops flowing around the mouth depending on how you're going to animate the character and to get proper creasing in the face. I'm going to kind of simulate how the muscles would wrap around the face. So I'm going to have a look at an image right now. So if you look at an image of the muscles and how they look around the face, you can see there's bands of muscles that wrap around the mouth, and they kind of come up and over the nose, and they wrap down around under the chin. So these are the muscles that are defining the shape of the face when you smile or have different expressions. And this gives you kind of an idea of how you'd want your edges to flow around the mouth, because as the edges wrap around the outside of the mouth, and if you're using morph targets or bones or whatever, you want to make sure that the creases follow the edges that you're cutting in around the mouth. So that's why we're going to reflow some of this geometry and create nice edge loops around the mouth. So the other thing is, I don't want any five-sided polygons like this one here. So I'm going to make sure to cut some of these edges through here to help clean up any five-sided polygons I might have. I also don't want triangles, because when I subdivide with triangles, I'm going to get some pretty nasty pinching. So I'm trying to keep everything quads so it subdivides nicely. And I'm going to start cleaning this up and cutting in new edges from here. Okay, so I'm going to start out by fixing these five-sided polygons. So I'm just going to grab this vertex at the corner here and connect it up here. So I'm going to grab these two vertices, and you could hit the connect button, or Control-Shift-E would be the keyboard shortcut. And I'll do the same thing down this way, Control-Shift-E. So this turns this into four-sided polygons on this side, and now we're starting to get an edge loop that's wrapping around through here like this. But you can see I've got triangles here and here that I want to get rid of. So what I could have done to fix that is I'm actually going to remove these that I just cut in. Sometimes it helps to connect things up and have a look at it, step back and look at it and see how you can start cutting things in to make sense. So had I done it like this instead, I'm going to use the cut tool, and I'm going to try cutting from here, from this vertex through the center here, and then down here like this. So now what I wind up with is four-sided polygons all through here. This is a four-sided polygon here, and I can start to use this loop from the corner of the nose and down under here as the chin. I can start to spread this out and start adding in new edge loops in between here. And then if I want to, I can wrap another one through the nose and down through here if I have to do that. So I'm just going to step back from the nose area, and I'm just going to focus on this area inside of here for now. So because we've welded the halves together, we had to do that to extrude or to chamfer the mouth open properly. If you still want to use symmetry, so I'm just working on one half still. At this point I'm going to drop down to Editable Poly and add the symmetry modifier on top of this. But make sure when you add the symmetry modifier you don't have anything selected in here. And because I'm working on this side, it's actually mirroring from the opposite side. I'm going to turn on flip to make sure it's mirroring the side I've been working on. So I could keep symmetry in there, and I'm going to work with editable poly, and I'm going to turn turbo smooth off for now, and I've got symmetry in the stack, and I'm going to use show end result anytime I want to see the symmetry on the other side. So as you're using the cut tool, you need to make sure that as you're cutting through the edges to vertices, you're landing on the vertice. Otherwise, you're going to want to double check by selecting where you've cut to, and if you see two vertices selected, make sure you weld them together. Sometimes it'll miss. You can turn on snaps when you're cutting, but if you don't cut directly onto the vertice you're trying to cut the line to, sometimes it'll just create the vertice right close to the vertice you're cutting to, but it won't actually connect them. So just try to be careful when you're using the cut tool. And you can usually tell if you missed because you'll see a shading difference between the polygons. So I'll actually go back. So this is what I could tell that this didn't weld, or I didn't quite cut to the vertice because of the way the shading has changed along the edges of these polygons. So I weld that together. This should look, the shading should be flat. So from here I'm just going to go around and quickly start fanning some of these out. I want this area to be nice edge loops through here, and I want to fan it out so that I can stretch this mouth open and closed when I'm using my morph targets later on. So I want to shift these edges back, but I don't want to shift them back in the view like this because it's going to distort the geometry. So what I'm going to do is start selecting vertices and drop down under edit geometry, and I'm going to use constraints. So I'm turning edge constraints on. So while this is on, if I move a vertice, it constrains it to the edges that it's connected to. So if I move it back in the Y axis, it's constraining it along this edge here. Same thing if I go up and down on the Z axis. It constrains it to the edge that it's connected to. So I can start pushing vertices back without deforming or distorting the shape of the mesh. So I'm just spreading out the face area by pushing some of these vertices back. Just want more room in here for the mouth. So down here I'm going to probably wind up using this edge as part of the chin area. So Bob doesn't really have a chin, but I'm going to throw this down here anyways. You can see Bob has a lip that puffs out, and I'll deal with that by making sure I have enough edge loops in here that I can pull out the puffy lip area. So I'm just spreading these edges out like this. And I only have to go to the center because I'm going to use symmetry. So now I've got nice edge loops wrapped through here already. Everything's still nice and simple. And from here I could start connecting in more edge loops around the lip area. So even before I do that, I can shape the mouth to be a little more open and round, so it's not so square. And again, if I flip symmetry on, you can see that it's working out. Yeah, so we're gonna be modeling the mouth open. This way we can deal with adding detail inside the mouth. I'm gonna add teeth if you wanted to model gums or whatever details you need for your character. If your character has a tongue, we're gonna model everything open, and when we're done modeling the head, we're gonna make a copy of the head with the mouth open to help us when we're creating morph targets later. But ultimately we're going to come back before we skin everything, and we're going to close the mouth. So the starting position of the mouth will always be closed on the character mesh, on the base mesh. But before we close this, we're going to model it open. We'll make a copy of it open to use as a morph, to create morph targets, and then we'll close it and we can create another copy to change the facial expressions from the closed position for morph targets as well. So make sure you're saving. I'm going to save this. Save as. I've already saved it to 3, so I'm going to hit plus, so it'll be saved as 4. Okay, so from here I'll start adding in edge loops around the mouth. So I'm just going to grab an edge here and hit ring, and now I can just connect in edge loops like this. So I know he's got this puffy lip area here, so I'm going to throw this edge loop in like this, kind of keep it fanned out a bit. This could be used as the bottom of that puffy lip area down here. And I know I'm going to need to create another one close to the lip to help me maintain the shape of his lip when he opens his mouth. So kind of like how we did the eyes, I'm going to ring and connect another edge loop close to the edge of his lip like this. So ultimately I'll be pulling these vertices out to reshape this, but right now I'm just cutting in the edge loops I need. Okay, so at this point we've already quickly blocked in the mouth with edge loops, and I can reshape all of this afterwards, but before I do, I'm going to go up to my symmetry modifier, and I'm going to collapse this into the editable poly modifier. So if you right click and go collapse to, you could click hold yes in case you want to undo it, but it's just going to take that and collapse it in. So now we just have editable poly and turbo smooth. So the symmetry modifier is baked in. So at this point I'm going to grab this mouth area. I've already cut in edge loops on the outside, so I'll grab the mouth as a border. Because it's open, I can grab it as a border. I'm going to cap the border under edit borders. It's going to close this down to one polygon in the center. So it closes the gap with one polygon, but I need to connect all these edges back through here. So I can quickly do this by going through and holding Control and selecting the vertices across from each other. So I'll hit Control Shift E, and then I'll just click, hold Control, Control Shift E all the way across. Of course you can hit the connect button, but this is quicker. So again, I need to cut this across here as well, because I want to be able to split the mouth through here when I extrude this back. So I'll have a top section of the mouth and a bottom section of the mouth when it opens up. So I could use the cut tool and try to cut from vertex to vertex, or if I don't want to use the cut tool, I can just hold Control and select these edges through here and connect them straight through the center. So I know this is connected through the center as long as slide is set to 0, so I'll click OK. And then I can just hold Control and Control Shift E, connect the corners like this. So doing it that way, I know everything runs straight through the center. Okay, so from here, I'm going to select by polygon. It should highlight the whole area. And I'm going to extrude the mouth back like this. So I'm just going to extrude back something like this. Click OK. Go to my left view and hit Alt X. So in the left view, I'm going to scale these polygons flat in the view. And I'm going to shift this down so it's coming straight back from the opening of his mouth. And I'll just bring this back towards the center. So at this point, for this character, for Bob, I'd probably just paint the back of his mouth a dark color, so when he opens his mouth it looks like it just keeps going down his throat. I could take this and scale it in the Y-axis to narrow the back of his throat. If you wanted to, you could keep extruding, and you could extrude and rotate so that it actually goes down into his throat. But for this character, this is fine. And just like with the eye though, when he opens his mouth right now, this whole area is going to collapse as it opens and closes. So to keep the center of his mouth open, I need another edge loop through there. So I'm going to hit Ring, Connect, and this edge loop here is going to hold his mouth open on the inside when he closes his lips. So I could scale this out like so, and if I turn on Turbo Smooth, you can kind of see what's happening here. So this edge loop's controlling the inside of his mouth and keeping it in the open position so that the mesh isn't collapsing when his lips close. And again, if you want the back of his throat to be more concave, because I've flattened it out, you could just grab your center vertices and push them back. So the way we're modeling this character, it's pretty low poly model, but we're subdividing with Turbo Smooth. But when we go to skin this character, when we set up our bones, it's going to be really easy to manipulate the envelopes for skin, because we're only dealing with such a low poly mesh. We're only going to be trying to control a certain amount of vertices. If the character's really dense with a lot of edges cut in, it's going to be trickier to control when you start skinning. So you can see we've got the back of the throat here. I could push that further back if I want to. I'm not too concerned about that though. I've got an edge through the center which keeps the mouth open. I could push this further back. I could also have a couple edges in here depending on how much control you need and how much your character's, or how wide his mouth is going to open. But I do need another one cut in closer to the edge here, because right now if I Turbo Smooth this, you're going to see this edge is pinching and it's really sharp. So I'm going to connect another edge loop close to the outside of the mouth, and this is going to give me a lip area. So later on, if I'm trying to open and close his mouth, I've got an area here for the lips that I can use. And as I close his mouth, the inside will still remain open, and this mesh won't collapse around any teeth or tongue or whatever I have in there. So again, depending how much detail you need on your character, if your character has really detailed lips, you might want to connect in some more edges. Like Bob doesn't really have much of an upper lip, but if your character had real puffy lips, you could start pulling some of these vertices out. Remember I turned on edge constraints. Remember to turn that back to none if you're trying to move vertices around without constraining them to the edge. So yeah, if I wanted to reshape this lip up here, I could start moving some of these things around like this, depending on the shape of your character's lip. And then I'm going to toggle Turbo Smooth to help me get the shapes. So I'm going to undo that. And I'm going to focus on the bottom of Bob's lip where it actually does puff out quite a bit. So this is where I was going to use this bottom edge here. So I can grab this section here, and if I grab it by the edge, and I'll grab this edge too, I can turn on Turbo Smooth and kind of push this out. So as I push this out, you can see it's starting to create that puffy section for his lip at the bottom. So that's the center. I'll also have to go through the sides here and do the same thing. So to avoid using symmetry again, I'll just hold Control and do both sides at the same time. So I'm looking from this angle because I want to make sure this curve here stays in a nice curve around the lip. I don't want it to look jagged or pointy like this. So I want a nice curve through here. So when I hit Turbo Smooth, it's nice and curved at the bottom. So if I hit F4, it's going to toggle edged faces on and off. So because I had reapplied Turbo Smooth after deleting it before, I'm going to bump that back up to 2 iterations and just start looking at this without the edges on to see how smooth everything looks. So it's starting to look pretty good. I'm going to have to go through and kind of change some of the features around his nose, and I'll just start tweaking the model from here. I'm going to start pushing and pulling vertices around and just reshaping things. So anywhere where I think it's pinching, or like I've got this seam to deal with here, I'm just going to go back into the base mesh and fan these areas out. So if I wanted to go around and do this carefully, I can grab vertices on either side and use scale to just scale them away from each other like this. So I'm just looking to space these edges out as evenly as possible. I don't want them pinching together because when I subdivide, as you pinch edges together like this, it creates a sharp edge in the middle, like this. So by scaling these away and fanning these edges out, I can eliminate the pinching in the center. Okay, so here I'm going to jump back to the left view, and I'm just looking at this edge here now at the bottom towards the neck. So I'm going to hit Alt X. I want to grab this and kind of rotate this a little more because I think this should be on more of an angle like this. At this point when I'm scaling, I'm going to right click on the scale tool and use the offset screen scale to make sure it scales in the front and side view at the same time. So if I look at this in the front, it will have scaled this way as well. So I'll just do that again in perspective so you can see it's scaling in all axes together. So in the left view, I'm just going to start straightening this up. At this point I'm going to want to cut through another edge loop here and here just to keep this curve nice and smooth through the bottom and the top. So I'm going to connect through the center like this. You can see how it kind of dips down at the front, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. And down here I'm going to do the same thing, ring and connect. And if I have to shift these a little bit to keep this nice curve, so I'm trying to keep a nice curve on the outside. And I'll do the same thing with this one, just slightly shifting it to keep these edges curving along the side of his head. Okay, so the other thing I'm going to do, actually I'm going to quickly continue fanning out a couple of these vertices here. Just spreading this stuff out. Remember to try and keep your curves flowing in the right direction. So up here, I'm going to wrap another edge loop through the center here, just to help keep the shape of the forehead up there. So again, if I want to look in the left view, you can see I can scale this flat. Just make sure it's straight. In fact, while I'm here, I'm going to remove this. I'm going to hit Alt-X and I'm going to grab the top of his head and line it up better. So this is where I want to grab these vertices at the top and rotate them back. So I'm going to rotate them and shift them over, because the top of his head kind of curves back like this as well. So I'm going to make sure this lines up just under his hairline as well, because his hair is going to go around this. And I'm just looking at these edges back here. So at this point I can kind of shift these from the back half towards the center and just make sure I've got these edges curving the right way back here. So even this whole section around his eye, you can see according to the drawing, I could scale this back still. So I can grab all this around to the base of the nose, and I should be able to shift this all together. And I can still scale this all together in the x-axis as well if I have to. So as I'm doing this, just paying attention to the curve of the edges. Okay, so now that I've straightened this up a bit, I'm going to throw that edge loop through the forehead. So I'm going to hit connect. I could scale this flat and then I can just rotate it just to make sure that that edge is running straight through his forehead, and then I'll just rotate it back to make up for the angle between the front and the back of the head. Okay, so I could use another edge running through the nose to help me keep the end of his nose pointy. I could also use another edge through here anyways to help if he's got cheekbones or whatever. So I'm just going to grab an edge here and hit ring and connect another one straight through his nose and around the back of his head. So if I hit connect like this, I won't worry about straightening this out. I'm just going to worry about keeping the end of his nose pointy. So I'll toggle turbo smooth on. I can push this down and pull this out, and this is going to help me keep the tip of his nose pointy like the drawing. So in the drawing he has, you can see his glasses from the side here too, so I'm just trying to ignore these the drawing with the part of the glasses. Okay, so if I look at this again from perspective and look towards the front, I can see if I need to mess around with the nose any further. Make sure there's nothing pinching up here. Everything's looking pretty good so far. I could probably stretch the base of his nose out a little further. Where I've cut this in, I could grab these vertices here and just to help keep the bottom of his nose where his nostrils would be a little sharper, I can pull this down like this, and you can see as I pull this down, if I have Turbo Smooth on, you can see how it starts to sharpen up the area down here. And while they're still selected, I'll scale them out too. I want to make sure that this comes straight out to the corner. So I'll do this, and then I'll actually scale the corners out a little further. So something like that. And again, the edge, the end of his nose is all right, but I've got a line down the center here. So you can see how, just like on the top of the ear, right now the bridge of his nose is pretty flat. And if I wanted to round that out, I could by grabbing that center edge and puffing it out. But even in the drawing, the bridge of his nose looks kind of flat, so I'm just going to leave it like this. Okay, so we're just working our way through, shifting vertices around and finessing the model at this point. We've got all the proper edges cut in. So when we go to animate this, we should have no problems. So this area here, which could be used as the cheeks, I could grab these vertices here and kind of pull them up. If your character did have cheeks, you could even cut another edge loop straight through the nose here if you've got really pronounced cheekbones. So actually I'm going to do that. I'm going to connect one more edge loop through here. And this extra edge loop here I could use to help puff out his cheekbones. So I can grab these vertices here and push them out, and if I'm looking at this with Turbo Smooth on, I can see how much I want to push this out and maybe push this up towards his eye and create this cheekbone area. So again, I'm looking at the curve here. Kind of want this to curve the other way for the cheekbone, out this way. So maybe I'll push this out, and if it's too much, I can push it back in a bit. Maybe pull this part down. Maybe grab these parts here and scale them in. Alright, so from here, there's a couple things we could do still with the face. I'm going to grab the ears. And I'm going to rotate them so that they're slanting back. Because as you can see in the side view, his ears are actually slanting back. So I'm going to grab this one here. And I've grabbed all the polygons down to the base. And I'm just going to carefully rotate. And as I rotate, you can see what happens at the back here. So I'm just going to pull this out as I'm rotating. So I'm actually going to go back. I'm going to shrink this down one and rotate it from here. Okay, so I'll show you a quick trick for creating hair, and then I'll do the eyebrows and the teeth, and I'm going to leave it at that. After that, I'm going to get into modeling the body for the character. So I can come back and add other details later. So I'm going to grab his head and turn off Turbo Smooth. And actually, I forgot to do something. Before I do this, I have to remember to put the symmetry back on here. So I'm going to add symmetry again. Make sure it's flipped so those ears are both slanted back like that. And then again, I'm going to go collapse 2. So symmetry is baked in there now. And I'm going to go to my left view, and basically what I'm doing here, I'm going to hit Alt X. I'm going to pick out some geometry to detach as a separate object to use as the hair. So I could start modeling the hair from a box and just attach it on here, but I'm just going to switch my selection tool to the lasso tool, and I'm going to quickly draw through the back here. So I want this section, and if I hold Control, I'm going to come right down to here. So I'm going to take all these polygons off the top of the head, and I'm going to hit detach. But I'm not detaching them completely. I'm going to detach them as a clone. And I'll call this hair. And click OK. So once you detach the hair like that, I'm going to grab the mesh for his head and hide it for a minute. So here's what I've detached. So basically this is just conformed to his head because we've detached it from his head. So if I want to go ahead and add the shell modifier to this, you can see I can push the outer amount to create some geometry that I can just start sculpting or extruding or pushing the vertices around and start creating the hair from this base geometry that I've extracted from his head. So I could convert this to editable poly, and I could just start blocking in the shape of his hair from this. So I'll switch this back to rectangular selection, and I can start pulling some of this out. So as I'm doing this, I'm going to keep in mind it's going to be attached back to Bob's head. So if I put Turbo Smooth on here, I'm going to keep in mind that it's going to be subdivided as I'm pushing this around. So you just quickly block the shape of his hair in from this. For a section like this right here where it's kind of split, I can create an edge in there. If I connect another edge through here, so I could either ring through, or let's look at this in perspective. So in this case, I'd probably do something like this, where I'm going to connect through here, and I'll connect through here as well. And then I'm going to grab the vertices and connect it through here. So I'm going to have triangles in here, but that's okay because I'm just using this to create the sharp partition between the top part of his hair and the side back of his hair. And again, I can use symmetry, so I'll just do the one side. So once I've done this, I'd be able to grab these edges and pull them back and down towards the edge here. So I've created the crease in here. Now I just have to pull these edges towards each other to make it nice and sharp. So I could grab those groups of vertices and just try to follow the image in behind. So if I'm following the image, I have to grab this whole corner section and pull it down. So anyways, I can come back and finish this later, but that gives you the idea of how you can quickly block in some hair just by extracting polygons from your character's base mesh. So I'm going to unhide the Bob character again. And I will take this hair and hide it for now. I can come back and finish it later. So what I'm going to work on next is I'm going to create some teeth and some eyebrows. So how you go about doing the teeth is really up to you. You could create a bunch of boxes and attach them together and create teeth. Same thing for the eyebrows. You could create the eyebrows from a box and just extrude. What I'd like to do is just make some quick cartoony teeth using shapes, and I'll just create an arc. So I'm going to go to the top view, turn on the grid to help me line things up. And I'm going to draw across the grid here like this to keep this line straight. And I'm going to pull the arc out like this, and then I'll right click. So I've created this arc shape, and if I look at it in perspective view, I can actually move this up closer to his mouth. So I'm going to make sure this is centered. I'll right click on select and move and just make sure that the X axis is centered. And if you select your spline, you can name this lower teeth. We're going to set up the lower teeth first. Ultimately it's going to get attached to Bob, so it'll become part of Bob anyways, but just in case you have to select this out of your scene, you can start naming it. So if I go into rendering, so I'm in the modify panel, I'm going to look under rendering and turn on enable in viewport. I can also turn on enable in renderer if I'm test rendering. And I'm going to switch this from radial to rectangular. And from here I'm going to adjust the length and width. So the width is going to be how tall the teeth are. Width is going to be the thickness of the teeth. And I can still go down and adjust the radius of the arc as well. So I'm going to take this and put it into the lower section of his mouth. And I'll take the radius down and make sure it fits, and I'll just make adjustments to fit everything inside. So once you place the teeth in here, this will give you an idea too if you have to go back to the mouth and pull any of these faces further back, or give yourself any more space inside your character's mouth. So I can already see I'm probably going to want to go through here and push these edges out and down, because I want the teeth to kind of come through this section here. So I want these teeth to be a bit longer so that they stick through the mesh. So if later on, if I decide to add bones in here to control the lip, and I want to pull the lip into a funny position, if I stretch this part of his mouth down, as I pull it down, I don't want to see the bottom of the teeth. I want it to keep going. So I'm going to make this a little bit longer. Something like this that can stick in here like this. So I also want to make sure it's not sticking through the bottom. So I'll just adjust it and tweak it and make sure it fits. So I'll rotate this a bit because his mouth would be open right now. So if you look at interpolation, right now it's set to 6 steps. So what that is, that's going to be how many segments are being created through this arc. I'm going to drop this down to 3. So what I'm looking at here is I've got a center edge. So each segment of polygons is going to be a tooth. So I want to make sure it's an odd number like 3, so I get a edge through the center, so I'll have 2 front teeth. If this is an odd number like 4, I'm going to have 1 tooth in the middle. So I'm going to have this set to 3. I'm going to add the edit poly modifier to this. And for the rest of this, I'm going to right click and isolate selection. So I'm isolating the set of teeth. It's going to hide everything else in the scene temporarily until I close this window. Or if you're using 3ds Max 2014, you can right click and there's an end isolation option. Okay, so from here you can see back here it creates this edge. It connects these vertices for some reason. I'm going to grab that, hit Control. I'm holding Control and hitting Remove. Actually, in that case, it probably didn't matter, but normally if you remove an edge, if you don't hold Control when you hit Remove, it's going to leave the vertices behind. So I'm going to go ahead and select an edge here. I'm going to hit Ring and Loop, so it grabs all the edge loops. But I'm going to hold Alt and deselect anything that's selected on the back. I don't want these back 4 edges on either side selected. So I'm going to hold Alt and deselect these. So what I'm going to do here is, while I have these edge loops selected, I'm going to add the Turbo Smooth modifier, which we'll be using with Bob later. Put it up to 2 iterations, drop back to Edit Poly, and those edges will still be selected. So I'm going to use Extrude. And what I'm going to do is extrude the height back, and you can see it's just taking those edges and extruding them back and creating these divots between each tooth. So something like this is okay. I'm going to click OK. And at this point I'm going to deselect edges now. I can still drop back down to the arc if I hit Hold Yes. I can still adjust the width and make these thicker if I have to, or thinner. So something like this is fine. Okay, so once you're done and you're sure you're done with this, you can go ahead and convert this to editable poly, but first I'm going to delete Turbo Smooth. I'll convert it to editable poly. And I'm going to take the faces on the bottom. If you hold Control and hit delete. So I'm going to leave the bottom of the teeth open. So this way, if I have Turbo Smooth on here, you can see it's going to round out the top part of the teeth and then leave the bottom open so it comes straight down. So I'm going to change the color of this to white for now. Eventually I'm going to have materials on here. So I'll delete Turbo Smooth. I'll end the isolation mode, and I'll take this set of teeth and mirror it in the Z-axis. So mirror Z-axis, make sure it's not a copy or a clone. Or sorry, make sure it's a copy. Click OK, and you can move this up to the top. This is your upper set of teeth. So just a quick way to make simple cartoony teeth that I can attach to the character afterwards. So I'm going to attach these to the Bob mesh. I can move them around if I'm using morph targets as a separate element, or I could actually rig these to a bone if I need them to move separately for some reason. Okay, so at this point I'm going to grab the Bob character, go back to editable poly for a minute, and just fix the bottom of his mouth where the teeth are sticking through. So I'll grab that lower set of teeth and hide it for a minute. And I'll just select around the area where I know I have to drop these vertices. So I could also grab these and scale them away from each other and open up the inside of his mouth a bit more. So I'm looking at this here, and you can see where earlier I puffed out this part for the lip. I still need to grab these vertices for the inside part because I want this edge to be close to the lip still. I'm going to pull these back towards this lip. And maybe I'll open up the back of his throat a bit more too. Okay, so I'll unhide the teeth. You can see they fit in there a lot better now. Looks pretty cool with the teeth in there. Could probably grab that upper set and pull them out a bit. So I just want to make sure I don't pull anything out too far towards the lip. So this again up here I can grab. This is where I've kind of pulled things out. And I want that inner edge loop closer to the lip. Okay. Alright, so if I grab the character and go down to Edit Poly, I'm going to attach the teeth now. And you can see it's just going to take on the color because I haven't separated or added materials. But now if I turn on Turbo Smooth, you can see everything with Turbo Smooth on. So I'm not modeling gums or anything like that. I don't need that much detail. It's just a cartoony character. If you wanted more detail, you could go in and add gums. You could extrude some sections in here, or you could have added the gums as part of the teeth. But I can still go back down to Edit Poly. I can turn on Turbo Smooth. I can still grab these teeth as an element and reposition them. So I'm going to hide that hair again. So we've got teeth. I'm going to add eyebrows. We could throw spheres in here to start setting up the eyeballs as well. So for the eyebrows, I'm pretty much just going to do the same thing where I'm going to use a spline. So if you go back to shapes again, you can hit Alt X to see through. So I'm going to use a line. It's already set up to rectangular. I'm just going to knock the length down before I start drawing. And you can see so I'll click around the end of one of the eyebrows. I'll create a point at the end, I'll create one in the middle, and then I'll come down to the other end. So just 3 points through here. And what I'll do from there is I'll go to the Modify panel, grab that vertice in the middle, and I don't want to put too much of a curve on this right now because ultimately this will get collapsed to editable poly, and I'll want to be able to still be able to use this in a morph target. So I'm going to want to have the eyebrow be able to curl in different directions. So I'll make this a bit of a curve, but somewhat straight across like this. And then if I'm looking at the edges, you can see here there's just the one edge through the center, and this is a sharp angle. So I still have that vertice selected, so I'm going to right click. You can see it's set to corner. I'm going to change it to Bezier, and that creates a Bezier curve for that vertice. So for now I'm going to grab the Bob character and hide it and just deal with the eyebrow for a minute. So if I look at this, in wireframe mode, you can see here that's my center vertice and this is the Bezier handle. So I can rotate this to change the curve, and you can see as I do, it's going to balance out the segments as long as the curve is equal between the center and the end vertices. So again, I can go to interpolation and I can knock the steps down to 3, just because I don't want this to have too many segments in here. It's going to be hard for me to control later if I'm setting up morph targets. My endpoints are both corners, and that's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and unhide everything. I'll hide that hair again though. So from here I'll go to perspective, and I'll just make sure this eyebrow is sitting out along the surface of his forehead. So I'll bring it out like this. I can switch to local and just rotate it in the local axis. So I'll rotate it something like this, and if you want it to curve with the forehead, you can go back into the line, grab your center vertice and pull it out in the local axis, and it'll give it a curve along the forehead. So I'll just push it back again, so make sure it's rotated enough. Again, you're going to use Turbo Smooth, so if you add Turbo Smooth to this, you can see if you have to make any adjustments before you attach it. So I might make it a bit thicker. So from here, I'll delete the Turbo Smooth. Just tweak it a little bit more with the rotation. Make sure it runs through here even. So from here, if I'm done with this, I'm actually going to save this in case I want to come back later. So if I convert this to editable poly, I can mirror a copy of it. So I'll mirror a copy in the x-axis and move it across to the other side of the forehead. So you can see when I mirrored, it didn't quite mirror the way I wanted to, so I'm going to do that again. So I'm going to make sure I'm in view, not local, and when I hit mirror, it'll mirror according to the view, not the local axis. So I'll click OK. Again, I'm going to move this across to the other side, and if I want to make sure it's lined up perfectly on the same side, you could just grab the one you mirrored from, right click on select and move, and copy the x-axis without the negative sign. So I'm going to copy and paste the position on the opposite side. Okay, so I can attach the eyebrows now. So I'll grab the Bob character, click attach, and there's his eyebrows. So now I can move those eyebrows around as an element again. I can set up a bone in here for each eyebrow and rig these just to the bone and move them around, and I can set up morph targets to have them curl. Okay, so I'll go ahead and grab or create a sphere for the eye. And I'll just move it up into position. So if I turn on edged faces, I'm going to take the sphere and rotate it with angle snaps so that this section is pointing out. So I can create a texture map for the sphere, or I could just texture these faces separate colors depending on how you need to set up the eye. But for now I'm just going to adjust the radius and make this fit inside his right eye. So his right is this side, my left is his right. So I'm going to throw the sphere in here, and I'll just check in the perspective view, make sure it's lined up. So this is where once you put the sphere in here for the eye, his eyes actually aren't spheres. They're kind of stretched, elongated sphere. So I'll go over how to set that up in a minute. Otherwise, I could go back and adjust the character and make his eyes rounder and make sure that they cover the sphere here. So if I wanted to do it that way, I could turn off Turbo Smooth for a minute. I could come back to the front view and just grab these vertices here and make sure that the sphere fits in the eye socket properly by shifting things over. And if I only adjust the one side, I'll have to use symmetry again. And then just collapse two. Just be careful as you're adjusting things that you're not accidentally selecting through to the back. You can use ignore back facing when you're selecting. So same thing, once you've set up one eyeball and you've adjusted the eye lids and eye sockets to match up, just gonna create another copy. You can hold shift and drag to create a copy, and I'll just copy the position again for the x-axis.